Hosting for With the First Link on the Trek Geeks Network is brought to you by Fansets, creators of cool pins and memorabilia from your favorite franchises. Visit fansets.com and use code FIRSTLINK, all capital letters, for your exclusive 10% discount. And right now, listeners of With the First Link will be selected to win one of 2 Fansets Deep Space Nine or Voyager insignia pins. All you need to do is follow our Instagram profile at FirstLinkPod, leave a review of one of our episodes, or follow our new Twitter account, also at FirstLinkPod. Have you already subscribed on social? No worries, you're already entered into the giveaway. But if you sign up on the new Twitter account or leave a comment, you get a second entry. Entries close November 30th, with the winner announced December 3rd. Thanks to all of you for supporting us this first season of With the First Link. Engage!
Hello and welcome to With the First Link, the podcast that hopes to make our future as bright and as just as the one that we see in Star Trek: The Next Generation. And we think that one way to do that is to recap and discuss the entire series, one episode at a time, doing our best to look at it all through an anti-oppression, pro-diversity, anti-racist lens. I'm Ruthie Cowper-Samoshi.
And I'm Matthew Simone, and today we'll be talking about The Neutral Zone. This episode was written by Maurice Hurley and Deborah McIntyre, and directed by James L. Conway. It first aired on May 14th, 1988.
For today's check-in, Matthew, would you ever want to get cryogenically frozen and then woken up centuries later?
Yes.
Really? Okay, tell me more. Say
Absolutely.
why.
Yeah, I think, especially, well, okay. I guess part of it depends on the circumstances. These people were dead.
Right.
And so the only chance at life was at some point in the future when medical science had caught up with whatever was going on with them. But personally, there's kind of a temptation right now where we look at the state of the world. And you're
Yeah.
Maybe if you could go to sleep and then wake up and know that it would be Star Trek future, then I would probably be count me in. That seems like a great place where the hopes and dreams that I have for society have been realized, and I could make a contribution to that society in the future, knowing that I could get enrolled in Starfleet Academy or be a member of the Federation. All that sounds great. So basically, in a way, I'm giving a shortcut answer to this because I'm kind of answering it as if could you go to sleep and wake up in Star Trek? Then I would say, yeah, for sure.
Right, which is not quite the question, although it is best case scenario, maybe.
Best case scenario, yeah. Maybe you don't know what that future is going to be like, but it probably then the conceit here is that it would be an escape. I should probably stick around and try to help with the present and what's going on with the world now, because this is the time that I live in.
Yeah.
What about you? Would you do that?
I'm pretty squarely in no for a couple reasons.
All right.
One is okay, so I think like you mentioned in this episode, the fact that these people it was either you fully die or you, I don't know, just die a little bit and then get frozen. So it's not like they're missing out on a part of their life that they would otherwise have participated in. But because that is my first thing, if you can't just miss out on part of your life, what if something amazing was going to happen? That would be sad. So yes. That's the first thing. But the second thing is kind of what you said about waking up in a Star Trek universe, but I think mine's a little less optimistic. I feel the future feels so uncertain. I don't know that I want to skip hundreds of years and be where are humans even gonna still be around at that point? What's the state of our world gonna be? And I don't know if I want to know.
Yeah, the planet might even be worse.
Exactly, yeah.
You just might wake up in a barren desert somewhere.
Right, or, maybe the planet will be fine, but our species will be extinct.
Right, so, and then what, yeah. Would that be bad?
It might be a little lonely.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I was speaking more in terms of loneliness. When you wake up and be okay, well, now the Earth is just inhabited by giant sloths or something, and that's right. my only friends.
Right, and then they see me and they're what is this creature?
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be a bit weird.
These stories, I can't think now off the top of my head. There's a couple stories where the character is suspended in animation and then wakes up in the future. And generally speaking, that future seems to be better. If I'm thinking of those stories, like if you think of, I guess Futurama.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking mostly is the premise of
Yeah.
Futurama.
And then this Star Trek episode. But what if you had a story where the person goes to sleep and then wakes up and things are worse?
Well, isn't that like the time machine? It's a little different. It's time travel. But I was thinking actually in getting ready for this, I was thinking that like this is effectively time travel.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is.
And so in the time machine, like I never read the book, but the movie, he ends up like super far in the future and is like, oh, wow, this is not good.
Yeah, there are stages along that journey to the future that are not good.
Yeah.
And maybe that's more of a lesson of wanting to skip ahead and what could happen. Although they had the capability of being able to go back. In this case, you can't.
Right.
You can't go to sleep and wake up in the past. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way.
No, much as we sometimes might want to.
But I have been, I think it has put into question my hope for the future. And I think probably more now than ever, I seem to be encountering or reading about, I think like a general sentiment right now is that people are generally quite worried about the Earth's future right now. And the fragility of our society and civilization. And I think a lot of those weaknesses were certainly exposed by COVID. I guess if I were going to be dead, then yeah, I would take the option. But if someone just said you could just go to sleep and wake up in the future, I do feel like I have a certain obligation to the present and the challenges that are going on in this world. And I don't know if I make much of a contribution. I do in my own way. I try.
Right.
I talk about science and climate change and with audiences and try to get us all thinking about these things. But I feel like I should maybe stick around and do what I can for this world, because this is the world that I've lived in. It's the world that's given me resources that I've used to survive with, and where there's people that I know. Who would you do the podcast with?
Who would I do the podcast with? Yeah, no, you're definitely not allowed to skip ahead before we hit the end of season 7.
All right.
So that I'll put my foot down on that. What's the Gandalf quote about like everybody who lives through difficult times wishes they had been like alive at a different time, but that's not for us to decide?
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
But what if you're given more time?
More time, yes, but not the choice to like skip ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's right. I guess that's what the distinction is in this case.
Yeah.
It's not just skipping ahead. It's that you're being given more time, but this is how it has to work.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Well, that was a nice little check-in for a nice little episode.
This idea of like what our obligation is to society seems to be a big one that's come up these days too, right?
Yeah.
It's because there seems to be breakdown in some of our understanding of the fact that we are connected to a wider society and that we do have, I think, obligations to that society, and that's important to recognize.
And I think like society and then also global obligations that don't just, because I think that one problem is that people sometimes kind of look towards the needs of their own community. And that does make sense, but that is not, I don't think that's okay to do at the expense of the rest of the world.
Yeah, like I think I've given thanks to Star Trek for having been shown a global mindset since childhood. Like I think I've always had that notion. Actually, I did a rewatch yesterday of Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, the one with the whales.
Yeah.
And realizing that even back when that was 5 years old when that movie came out. It's the first movie I remember seeing in theaters.
Right.
And how already there was this environmental message that had come across in this film, and this idea that we have to take care of the planet as a whole. The Enterprise crew have to go back in time and recover these whales to repopulate the species in the future, and that we are essentially going to be responsible for our own destruction, and that we had been at one point in the past, and that even though the future has changed, it is different, we're paying the price now for this environmental damage we had done to our planet in the past. And so I've always had this idea of the environment and our sort of global connection running through my whole life, and I guess I have Star Trek to thank for that.
Yeah, and just the idea that like it comes up throughout. It comes up a little bit in this episode, but that humanity, once realizing that we weren't alone in the universe, decided to get its act together, basically.
Yeah.
It is really frustrating that the various crises that have been going on over the last several years have not been enough for us to like get our act together, work together globally to fix them. Like, we couldn't do that for COVID. It doesn't look like we're doing that for climate change. We can't do it for human rights. Like, what is it going to take for humanity to learn to work together?
Yeah, and it might require a change in just how we do decision making. We just had an election here in Canada. We
did.
And I think I was probably like the least excited I was for any election I've ever participated in.
I was angry about it.
Yeah, it's just like, this feels like completely useless. It's just, it's fascinating to sit down and have to vote for candidates and be like, none of these people are still really seem to be talking about climate change.
Yes.
It's like, it's it's like having a whole bunch of people that are sitting around together in a house and they're all talking about how they're going to run for leadership of that household, but none of them are talking about the fact that the roof of the house is on fire.
Yeah.
And it's very strange.
All right. Well, I guess that means we're sticking in this time period.
It looks like we're together, Ruthie.
Okay, sounds good. Then I guess we can do the rest of the episode.
In this episode, the Enterprise investigates outposts that have disappeared in the neutral zone. Meanwhile, 3 cryogenically frozen people find themselves revived on board the Starship Enterprise.
What a premise.
Picard's at a conference.
Yeah.
And he's going to be back in several hours, and they found a centuries-old space capsule from Earth, just happened to be floating around, and I'm kind of taken aback that Riker doesn't seem to care. He's just like, I don't know, why would you want to check this out? It's just a derelict.
So one thing I heard about this episode, or one thing I read, was that there was actually like a strike happening around the time it was written. So it didn't go through the same number of rewrites that episodes usually go through.
Oh, okay.
So that's why some things might feel a little off. Like, yes, the fact that Riker's like, oh, why do you want to investigate this thing? It's not like we're on a mission of exploration or anything.
Yeah, why do you
want
to explore? It's silly.
Yeah, it is funny. And then, Data's like, I want to check it out. And Riker's like, well, I don't understand why, but okay. And he and Worf beam onto this space capsule, and Riker is very clear, like, make sure you're back before Picard returns. He's basically like, we're not supposed to be fooling around when the captain's away.
Yeah, we should be exploring without the captain.
No, we should be sitting quietly and just waiting,
hanging out,
for him.
Floating in space. The ship seems to have technology that's, like, even before the original series, it looks like a pre-warp vessel, which kind of asks the question as to how it got this far into space, but Data says he might be able to find out what it is by downloading the quote-unquote old-style disk drive.
Yeah.
I was waiting for them to, like, whip out a floppy disk or whatever.
Also, like, there's a door that doesn't open automatically, so Worf is like, oh, it must have been sealed shut with age, and is gonna, like, use his phaser to open it. Data's like, no, it's okay. You can just use the handle, which, like, surely they have encountered doors like this before.
They're in conflict now over how they both resolve stuff, because Data could just, like, brute force the door open. Worf's like, I want to shoot things.
Yeah. I will also say that, like, Worf's reaction, now that I think about it, makes a little bit of sense, because when I find a door that, like, doesn't open the way I think it will open, my first assumption is that, like, something's broken or locked, and not that, like, I just opened it wrong. Because Worf, like, he literally walks into it expecting it to open automatically and was like, oh, it must be broken.
Right, yeah, because they're all used to that happening. When you walk up to a door, it's just going to open on its own. And if something doesn't open, we shoot it.
Yeah. So the room is filled with these, like, refrigerated pods. They're, like, human-sized pods. Most of them have, like, skeletons in them. And then I thought it was really creepy. There's one that's empty. Like, what happened to the person who was in there?
Maybe they didn't have a full house.
Right before we go into the intro, Worf finds one and is like, Data, look at this. And there's, like, a pretty white blonde woman.
That's the lead into the intro. Bum, bum, bum.
Bum, bum, bum.
And Data and Worf find that there are at least 3 bodies that are still alive, and that they were designed for refrigeration rather than for an extended journey. And I don't know what the difference in that would be.
I think it's like this was storage. It wasn't like these people were on their way somewhere.
But that still doesn't explain why the craft is as far out into space.
No, but it's like, it's not like in Alien, where they go, they sort of freeze themselves. They put themselves in stasis to travel far distances.
The neutral zone is really far away from Earth. And for a sublight vessel to get this far out into space would literally take millions of years. I'm probably overthinking the travel plot, story, space, and astronomy parts of this. Maybe it fell into like a wormhole.
Yeah, you're putting more thought into it than I think the writers did. So.
Oh, yeah, maybe. That's okay. So Picard is on his way back.
The timing of this was very confusing to me because they're like, we have several hours. And then it's like they just find these 3 people. Like, how long were they on that ship for?
So, yeah, I guess I'm not sure why this is taking so long.
Yeah. But anyway, Picard is like, all right, I'm on my way back. I want to get going as soon as possible. And Riker's like, okay, Data, Worf, get back right now. But Data explains that they've found these 3 containers and he thinks it would be best to take them back to the Enterprise. And I'm sure nothing could go wrong there.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the start of every sci-fi horror film. Picard comes onto the bridge and tells LaForge to lay in a course that will take them into the neutral zone. And everyone's surprised by this because typically you don't go into the neutral zone.
Yeah.
So first of all, what is the neutral zone?
Okay, yeah, I have some questions. Okay, first of all, the neutral zone is this buffer between Federation space and Romulan space, right? Mm-hmm. To be honest, it's been a little while since I looked at the map that friend of the pod, Tom, gave to both of us.
I don't even know if that map was standardized even by this point yet in Star Trek.
My sister brought something up, which I'm going to bring up here.
Okay.
There's Romulan space and the neutral zone and Federation space.
Mm-hmm.
But the Enterprise is exploring all of this unexplored space. Is the space that they are exploring, has it already been designated as Federation space, even if there are these planets that no one has been to?
That's a good question, Ruthie, and I don't have an answer for it. I'm not really sure.
Okay.
Maybe it's unexplored space on the other side of explored Romulan space.
Like, Romulan space is just kind of annexed between Federation space and unexplored space.
Maybe, yeah, because I guess how could it be unexplored and then how would you have a neutral zone as a buffer to an unexplored region of space? Like, how could you it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You're right. Right now, it's a zone of plot.
Yes.
A place that usually you wouldn't want to go into because you'd be in violation of treaty with the Romulans. I don't think at this point the neutral zone, because there was also a neutral zone between the Federation and Klingon territory, but I think that's gone now.
That was an original Trek, right?
So yeah, I think that was an original Trek. And so we're heading there at Warp 8, and he wants to meet with the staff on the observation deck.
Right. So Picard explains to Riker, Worf, Data, and Troy, notably not LaForge, I feel, that 2 Federation outposts in the neutral zone have been destroyed, and then there are others that haven't been heard from in a long time. So Worf suspects that this is the Romulans doing, and Picard says that that's Starfleet's idea as well. And Riker says there has been no contact with the Romulans since the Tomed incident.
That was a bad time. That was a bad time.
What was the Tomed incident?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But we're meant to think that it must have been bad.
Yeah, and so Picard says that it's been 50 years since like the Federation has heard from them, but there clearly was some contact because Worf talks about the Kittimer incident where his parents were killed. That involved Romulans. In this episode, he says like they attacked. That was within 50 years. There's no way Worf is over 50. Anyway, that's a little confusing.
I guess the time maybe they don't count that because it wasn't directly an attack on the Federation.
Maybe.
Although the Kittimer is that is a Klingon territory.
Yeah.
I believe. Yeah. Anyway, so Starfleet plans to send a ship to figure out what's going on, and of course, it's the Enterprise.
Yep.
They want to establish relations with the Romulans or figure out what the next move is going to be, but not to engage in any battle. And Troy reiterates that there is limited information. So we really don't know. The Romulans are very mysterious at this point. We've seen them in the original series.
Yeah.
But we've yet to see them in Next Generation.
Yeah. And how often did they show up in the original series?
I don't really remember because it's been a long time since I've done any rewatch of original series. One of my favorite original series episodes that features the Romulans is called Balance of Terror. And it stars Mark Leonard, who later goes on to play Sarek as the Romulan commander that the Enterprise is playing a cat and mouse game with.
Yes. Yeah, I like that one. One thing that Picard specifically says, and he's talking more about the Romulans, but he specifically says, I want no surprises. Which you would think that would be a good time for Riker to be like, hey, you should know that this thing happened while you were off the ship.
Right, yeah. But it's awkward, so he doesn't want to bring it up at the time.
He doesn't. So instead, Crusher tells him. She's like, the people from the capsule that Data brought in. And he's like, the who from the what?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what just happened?
Because Riker's like, oh, just let someone else tell him.
So she's like, yeah, I thawed them. And he's like, I beg your pardon.
Yeah. And I guess Data received permission from somebody to thaw these people out or whatever.
Crusher says that like they were falling apart. Like the crypts, she says, that were holding them were like falling apart. So she made the medical decision. I guess she's allowed to. Because
I guess in her mind they're not they might be dead, but they are revivable for now current technology, which is kind of the whole point of freezing them to begin with. So they all had conditions that would have been terminal in their time when they were frozen, but she has healed them, and now they're not dead. They are now sleeping in sickbay, and each had been frozen after they died.
Yeah.
Cryonics, she called it this 20th century fad where people fear dying so much that they were frozen at the moment of death, as if, we've gotten over this fear now.
But you remember that fad, right? In the late 90s? Everyone was freezing themselves.
I do remember that being talked about quite a bit.
I remember it from Austin Powers.
Well, yeah. Yeah, that's another time. Was the future better in his case when he woke up?
Well, he went from the 60s to the 90s.
Yeah.
So he didn't like it. It's been a long time since I've seen Austin Powers, and I honestly don't think I'm going to watch it anytime soon.
No, not for research for the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do remember this was a thing where people were starting to talk about being frozen. So I guess that was around this time that the episode was written.
Yeah, and there was I definitely remember it coming up in Futurama as well. Like, in addition to that being the whole premise, there was the whole saving famous people's heads and all of that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of heads in jars in Futurama. That was a thing.
So okay, I guess it was a fad. It just didn't take. It was more of a fad in talking about it, not in actually doing it.
I guess at the time we've been talking about other fads that rich people do. So in the past it was freezing yourself. Now it's going to space. And now we have both together in this episode.
Yeah, there we go.
Picard asks Data to come to sickbay and tries to explain why he's upset about what Data did. And Data understands the point that they were already dead, but he says it seems like the right thing for us to do was, and this whole time Data's like, hey, why aren't we exploring? Why aren't we helping these people? Why aren't, isn't that also our mission? And so he seems to be trying to keep them all on point, basically.
I think part of Picard's thing is he's not actually upset that Data did this, but he's just frustrated that it's happening now. And he's trying to communicate this without, blaming Data.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he does a pretty good job. He's like as soon as Data's like, yeah, I don't know, it seemed like the right thing to do, Picard is like, okay, fine, we'll just add that to my plate of things to deal with right now in addition to the Romulans.
A lot of what the Enterprise does is always seems to be pulled in these two directions. Either it's engagement in sort of these galactic politics and grand overarching plots that affect the galaxy versus these tiny storylines that are more of a human element, and you have both of those come together in this one episode, and Data that's the fulcrum of both. Saying we know that these big things are going on, but it's also important for us to remember these small, more human stories as well, and you kind of both in this episode.
Yeah. So Picard decides before we wake these three people up that he needs security, so he just calls Worf. They start with the blonde woman. Crusher hyposprays her, and she starts off waking up and she looks really happy, and then she looks really confused, and then she sees Worf, and we get the goofy little theme song.
And then she faints.
Yeah.
As you do.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. Then we get a little commercial break, and then as we come back, Data decides to tell everyone about the information that he found in the capsule's computer. So it's a little weird that he's talking about them as they're waking up. The first one is Claire Raymond. She's 35 years old. She is a homemaker and died of an embolism. So that would have been sudden. Then the second one is Ralph Offenhouse, a 55-year-old financier who died of advanced cardiomyopathy And so he would have known for a while that he was going to die. And then the last one is LQ Sonny Clemens. So he's a musician, and he died, it looks like drug use.
He's one of my favorite musicians. I've listened to his stuff for years.
I have a comment to make.
Yes.
Okay, so Data's talking about Claire Raymond being a homemaker, and he makes the little throwaway line of, oh, I guess she worked in construction, which, like, okay, it's funny. Like, Data's lack of knowledge is sometimes funny. Here's my issue. I could make a comment about how, like, taking care of the home is traditionally women's work and therefore it's not valued, but that's not the comment I'm going to make. How is it that in a century where they don't care about money anymore, no one is confused by the job of financier?
Right, but they are by homemaker.
Yeah, homemaker, that doesn't make any sense. But and I had to kind of Google, like, what is a financier? Because it's the kind of thing that I've only, like, heard about and, like...
It's kind of thing that people like you and me wouldn't know a lot about or necessarily understand.
And it's, like, basically how you become a financier is you have a lot of money or you have access to a lot of other people's large sums of money. He's
basically like a stockbroker, right?
I guess.
Except if we had this from modern time, this guy, he would have been woken up and been talking about, like, crypto all the time. Or whatever.
Totally. Yeah. He'd definitely be into, like, NFTs or stuff like that.
Yeah, he's like, I got all this Bitcoin.
Yeah.
What's it doing these days?
Yeah. And, like, but they're different. Like, I was Googling it, and there are different kinds of financiers. And some of them are, like, people who are, like, stockbrokers or, like, do a lot of trading and that kind of stuff. But some of them are just, like, people who already have a bunch of money and use it to fund things.
It sounds great.
Yeah, so...
I would use it to fund space exploration.
That, to me, is the most... Out of these three people, that's the most confusing. Like, what do you mean your job was to have money? I thought people had jobs so that they could have money.
Right, yeah, I think that's where some of, like, the present-day bias seeps through in the episode, because that character, I think, receives, or will receive the most kind of, like, judgment and disdain from the crew, but it probably should have elicited the most confusion, because probably people would be like, how is this a job?
Yeah.
What are you doing? I also, like, there's a thing here where they mention Sonny Clemens died of deterioration of his system from chemical use.
Yeah.
And there's a comment here that Picard makes. He says, sounds like someone who hated life.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's pretty judgy.
Super judgy.
As well.
Yeah.
Because as we get to know Sonny Clemens, I don't think he hates life at all.
He seemed to really enjoy it.
He might enjoy things a little bit too much.
But it also, it was like he hates living, but he's too afraid to die. And there was a lot of judgment.
There was. Yeah.
I just felt like he was the kind of guy who was like, well, I'll try anything once, including being cryogenically frozen.
Frozen, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he wanted to keep living.
Yeah.
Anyways. So Picard leaves for the bridge and he tells Riker to take charge of the guests, but just keep them out of the way because I have important space politics stuff to do and we don't want to deal with them. And Riker tries to explain to them what's going on, which is obviously an overwhelming task.
Yes.
Often House kind of like starts in with the classic stuff. He wants to know, like, is the Enterprise American? What year is it?
We learned it's 2364. I don't know if we had that specific year before, but it's 2364. Clemens wants to know what Data is. And then he's also like, am I alive? Like did this work? I need someone to say it. And they're like, yep, you're alive.
Yeah, because if you wake up in an environment that's so strange, who knows? Maybe you're like, is this the afterlife? Like, what is going on?
The afterlife waiting room.
The afterlife, the lobby. We're in the lobby of the afterlife. Raymond is confused because she didn't know that she died, right? The other two had pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
She thinks that, like, maybe her husband had frozen her after she had died. Couldn't live to part with her, or the possibility that she may return one day.
Right. So we sort of see their personalities. Like you said, Offenhouse is very, like, is this American? And he wants to check on his bank and see his portfolio or look at the Wall Street Journal. Clemens is more of a like, this seems like fun. This is the next adventure. And then Raymond is like, she's just really trying to figure out, like, she's coming to terms with the fact that, like, A, she died, B, she didn't die, and then, like, C, everyone she knows is gone.
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, we have a range of personalities here.
Back on the bridge, Troy is explaining what an encounter with the Romulans might be like, and that they are creatures of extremes. We know that they are related to Vulcans, but they are very different. So Vulcan and Romulus, they basically split off from each other. Romulans went on to continue to be these passionate, beings, and whereas the Vulcans try to temper themselves with the cooling force of logic.
Yep.
They believe that they are superior to everyone else, and certainly that may be true from maybe a technological standpoint. There might be, they've always kind of rivaled the Federation in that case, at least. But they are curious about humans, and which has kept the peace. And they typically won't make the first move of aggression in a conflict.
Right. Or at least, like, maybe this is me with my other knowledge of Romulans coming in, like, they won't outright make the first move. They might try to goad someone into making the first move, but they won't. They'll, like, keep that plausible deniability.
Back in their crew quarters, Clemens orders this massive meal from a replicator. He's like, a steak and a mess of greens. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, that's, like if you could eat anything you wanted from a replicator,
sure.
You'd probably be eating lavishly often. But then switches that meal. He's like, forget it. I just have a martini with 2 olives.
It's so funny. I have been recently, like, having a hard time because it's like, I'm too tired to cook. And, like, do I want to order something? And while I have never gone from, like, a massive meal to, like, no, I want a martini instead, I've definitely, like, switched back. Be like, I'm going to order, like, this massive thing. Actually, no, I'm just going to have a couple of apples for now.
Yeah.
That's classic. Like, I don't know what my body needs at the moment.
There's also usually a financial concern there that these individuals no longer have, which is a nice thing.
Yeah.
It would be nice to at least wake up in a future where you don't have to worry about money anymore.
That would be really nice. Yes.
He wants to watch sports.
On the TV, the boob tube.
Apparently, television didn't last much beyond 2040. What do you think, Ruthie? Is that an accurate prediction?
I wouldn't be surprised if people don't have TVs because they just use their computers after 2040. 19 years from now, television's going to be obsolete. I don't know.
The way I thought of it was that I guess you watch television to experience different narratives and realities that couldn't be your own. Maybe so they would be watching shows about people like in the 20th century.
Maybe.
Would that be a thing? Because that would be like, if I lived on the Enterprise, why would I watch TV? Because when I watch TV, it's to be on the Enterprise.
For you, specifically.
Yeah, for me. Yeah. That's. I was thinking about, like, well, would I still watch TV on the Enterprise? Probably not. I don't know.
Yeah,
anyway.
There is a kind of, like, funny shot where Clemens is like, well, what do you guys do for fun around here? And then it, like, cuts to Riker sitting beside one of those 3D chessboards. And it's kind of like, oh, no, we have heightened ourselves beyond needing television. But it's also like, well, this is pretty rich coming from a television show.
Yeah, and also from a guy who sits around his quarters and watches, like, the holographic people dancing around.
Yeah, they don't call it TV. They just go to the holodeck for crying out loud. But that, like, what's living through what's his name? Dixon Hill?
Yeah.
That's TV.
That's TV.
By another
Except
name.
it can kill you.
Yes.
Yeah,
I prefer the kind where I'm not at risk of being literally killed.
Picard calls Riker to the bridge, and Offenhouse wants to talk to him so he can phone Geneva. Offenhouse is very like, let me speak to the manager. He's got very much of that, like, attitude about him.
Okay, you don't understand. Things are different here.
I think it's a coping mechanism almost from his part.
Yeah. And it kind of comes up later. He brings that up, but it's like, he's like, oh, I need the Wall Street Journal. Like, can you imagine waking up 400 years from now being like, no, I need a newspaper from when I was around.
Yeah, I'm so assured, or at least clinging to the hope that the threads of my life as I understand them are still exist in this time in some form.
Yeah.
As to request them. And again, I don't think that he actually thinks that. I do feel like it's almost like a way of assuaging panic, kind of hiding on or hanging on to these familiarities. Clemens tells Data that they want to find some low mileage pit woofies.
I think that means young groupies.
Yeah, that's pretty rough.
It's not good. Yeah, Clemens is not the best character by any means.
Yeah, most of the time I find him charming, but that one statement was cringy.
There's another later where he slaps Crusher's butt, which is not fun.
I think I missed that in my rewatch.
Yeah, lucky you.
That sucks. Data and Riker discuss the three of them on the way to the bridge, and Riker wonders how humans survived the 21st century. And you know what, Riker?
Same.
I share that sentiment.
Yeah, no, let's see if we make it through. It is kind of like, I do have to say there is a certain amount of hope in this that's like, we can get pretty bad, but maybe we'll turn it around.
Yeah, in my rewatch of Voyage Home yesterday, McCoy makes a similar statement. He's like, they're walking around San Francisco in 1986 or whatever. And he's like, it's any wonder these people made it out of the 20th century. And like, yep.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
They're 6 hours now from the neutral zone and can't contact any outposts in the vicinity. And Riker thinks that they've all been destroyed. So this is a serious problem.
It is. And Riker, I gotta say, is like, he's really coming in hot in this episode. He's really like, we should be fighting. We should be ready to fight. This is a trap. It's a setup. In a way that might, again, be related to the fact that there weren't as many edits done on this episode, because he's really into fighting. But he does make a good point. So Data says that all of their information on the Romulans is going to be out of date. And Riker's like, well, the upside to that is that the information the Romulans have on us will also be out of date. Like, let's come in fighting. They're not going to expect it. And Worf agrees. And Data's like,
of course he does.
Yeah, of course Worf agrees. But Data points out that really will only work if the Romulans' intent is actually hostile, and they really don't know that that's the case.
And suddenly their meeting is interrupted by Offenhouse, who managed to get onto the comm system and is insisting on talking to Picard. And as he's speaking, Picard leaves, goes down, and then
he yells for so long.
Yeah, he yells for so long that Picard is able to come down and actually enter the room. And obviously Picard is angry that Offenhouse has used the comm panel for anything other than ship business. And he makes this interesting point. Offenhouse is like, well, then why doesn't it need an executive key?
Yeah.
And Picard replies basically that we don't use those kinds of security measures on the ship because everyone is able to control themselves.
That's something that I've definitely noticed, like communities where there is a certain culture of a certain kind of behavior. It's something I've seen in schools and even in like individual classes in schools, and then other communities, like you are able to have less enforcement when you have a culture of like respect of other people's belongings. When you don't need to be like, okay, we're going to lock everyone's stuff up because people just, also again, like people's needs, everyone's needs are met. So it's not like there's no like scarcity of resources. You don't have to like steal to survive. That's an important piece as well. But like when you've got a culture of like, well, we've all got what we need and let's respect each other's things, you then don't need to have like passwords and executive keys to the same extent. But Offenhouse comes from a time when that wasn't the case. And
it's kind of about power and authority. Picard explains to him that there isn't any money anymore.
Yeah.
And then Offenhouse explains that his concern is not about possessions, but it's about power and the ability to control your life. And Picard essentially tells him that kind of power is an illusion.
Yeah. Offenhouse is also very like, he makes some classist comments about how like, well, you couldn't understand because a military career has never been considered to be upwardly mobile, but like I work in business and business is important and people care about that. You're just an army guy. Yeah,
you just control the most powerful starship ever created by humanity.
Yeah, no big deal. No big deal. Yeah, and then Raymond starts crying because she misses her kids. To his credit, Picard doesn't just foist her off onto Troy, although he tries to be comforting and gives her a little awkward pat on the back. But he does ask Troy to come and deal with this. And I was like, it would have made sense for her to have been there from the beginning. But I also kind of like that she wasn't there because she was a necessary part of the main mission, which was like doing research on the Romulans.
Right. So now they've asked her, we need you to step out of that role for a moment and come into the other plot line.
Yes.
Because we've got issues going on here. And that makes sense because her expertise are needed in both areas of this story.
Yeah.
I understood why Raymond was crying at that point. I mean, it's one thing to be out of time that far, and then Offenhouse is just creating like a completely toxic environment.
Absolutely.
And it sucks. So Picard leaves and Troy arrives and starts talking to Raymond, who's having a really hard time, wants to know what happened to her children. And so they realize now, well, Troy might be able to find out what happened to the rest of her family and give her some answers.
So meanwhile, Clemens, he asked before before Picard left, he was like, I need to see that pretty little doctor of yours. And, just being so charming. But what he wants like meds of some kind. And Crusher's like, but you don't have a medical need for it. And I can't tell if it's like he doesn't have a medical need that she recognizes, but he is addicted. And so he wants like some kind of drug because he's feeling withdrawal symptoms, or if he just wants them for fun because like he wants to get high. Like, yeah, but it's clear that that's kind of what he wants. And then he's like, okay, fine. If you're not going to give me meds, like I want to hang out with that android. And that's when he slaps her on the butt. And she's like, much obliged. Yeah. And then, so Troy is showing Raymond like 10 generations of her progeny, which is also sad. And like, I feel like she's the most relatable of the three.
Oh yeah. Cause like she's worried about people and family and the other two are, I mean, Clemens is like, okay, well, I'll just like reintegrate into this new life or whatever. Yeah. He's trying in some ways that he can, but still obviously leaning on, I wouldn't call habits, but like choices that he would have made in the past to find some kind of footing.
Totally.
And then of course there's Offenhouse who's just, where's my money?
Yeah. I mean, Offenhouse, I don't think he is the sort of person who I would have chosen to spend a lot of time with like now.
No.
Like Claire Raymond, it's hard to know because it's hard to know what kind of person she was like because she's in shock. Clemens a bit much for me, but Offenhouse I can say for sure, like, no, you are not a person I would want to have in my life.
Data shows up in Clemens' quarters and Clemens wants to have a party.
Yeah.
So he says he was at some suds, some songs, and some
good
there's
times.
like a third S there. Yeah. There's an alliteration he has. But anyways, Clemens explains that he's not having a difficult time as the others because it's all the same to him. It's people and life and whatever.
Riker calls Data to the bridge and he's like, we're approaching the neutral zone, and that makes Clemens nervous. And he's like, what's a neutral zone? And who are these Romulans? And let's not invite these Romulans to our party.
And Data's like, no, I think not. So in the neutral zone, the outposts are gone with no trace. There's no evidence of attack. And Worf says it's like some great force is basically just scoop them off the surface. Like they're just gone.
Yeah, it is weird. And Offenhouse can tell that something is off. And I guess part of his thing as like a business person, he had like good instincts about people. So he's like, I can tell that everyone on this ship is tense. How he can tell that, but they've met very few people and they've been in that room is like beyond me, but whatever. He can tell. And Clemens like, yeah, for sure, but there's nothing we can do about them. And by the way, look at this guitar that Data replicated for me. And it's got like all these sparkly stickers on it.
It's amazing.
His name. It says Sunny.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
He says, these folks don't need us swimming in their soup.
Yeah. And Claire Raymond is like, I don't care. Like, I have bigger things to deal with than what's going on this ship. Like, I'm having a bit of an existential crisis.
But Offenhouse, who is a bit of a control freak, he needs to be in power. He needs to know what's happening. So he leaves. He just walks out ominously. I guess there's no security keeping them in place.
Nope.
So he walks away. Back on the bridge, we can't find the other outposts. So Riker and Worf think the Romulans are up to something. Probably have maybe improved their cloaking device.
Yeah.
So they've used one in the past. Maybe it's even better now. So they should maybe go to battle stations.
Yeah. But Picard says no, because like if they do that, then like if there is a Romulan ship out there, they'll be able to tell that the Enterprise is powering up their weapons. And he like Troy said, he's like, they're not going to make the first move. So he doesn't want to make the first move and have them retaliate, but he does allow them to take the ship to yellow alert, which Offenhouse hears as he's walking sneakily down the corridors. And then he enters a turbo lift and he's like really confused because there are like no buttons.
Yeah, exactly. How do we get around anywhere?
Yeah. But then he figures out, he's like, where's the captain? And the computer tells him. So he goes to the bridge, which apparently you can just do.
Worf finds a disturbance on the sensors, but can't get a firm reading. And Riker wants to transfer power to the phasers and armed torpedoes. And again, Picard's like, no, we don't want to engage in battle. And you always wonder if that first little, it's almost like a bit of a feint that we see on the sensors. It's almost maybe like someone's trying to bait them into attack.
But like, how many times does Picard have to explain that he doesn't want to engage in battle.
Again, it may not be the best writing,
Yeah.
but I think we're starting to see some of the inexperience maybe from Riker
Maybe.
on this one. Yeah, that he's kind of losing his cool.
Picard is like, we don't want to, he started off the mission, he's like, we don't want to engage them in battle. And then as soon as something's wrong, Riker's like, we should get ready to fight them. And he's like, no, we don't want to engage them in battle. And then like something else happens, like, let's shoot them. And it's like, okay, Riker, calm down.
Calm down.
Worf loses the signal just as Offenhouse makes it onto
Strolls
the
on the
bridge
bridge.
and like no one notices that he's there. And so LaForge thinks that they have probably improved their cloaking device. And Picard's like, yeah, they were probably trying to figure out what we were up to.
And see if we would fire,
Yeah.
right? Trying to bait them into firing. So Offenhouse makes his presence known. He's like, who the hell are they? When you're saying they, who are you talking about? And Riker says, well, get them off the bridge. And security tries, but then stops to watch as on the view screen, a Romulan warbird decloaks in front of them.
It's amazing.
And this is the first time we've seen it. We've actually seen, it's a cool ship design, and this is the first time we see it.
Yeah, I love the Romulan warbirds because like they have the cloak, but then they also, even when they're like not cloaked, they still kind of look like they're half not there.
Yeah, because there's a big void in the
Yeah.
center of their ship, the way it's designed.
And then
yeah.
they're this like dark, glowy green color. So it looks like it would, I don't know, be kind of reflective still. Yeah, it's great.
So Picard wants to open hailing frequencies, which is the whole point of what he's been trying to do, is establish contact and relations. And Worf is surprised. He's like, these are Romulans. They believe humans and Klingons are a waste of skin.
And Picard is like, get a hold of yourself, Worf. Open the hailing
Yeah,
frequency.
control your emotions.
So then he addresses the Romulan vessel, and Data says all of their systems are armed. But Picard says, yeah, but they haven't fired.
Romulans respond. They're slow to show up on the screen. And there's Commander Tabak introduces himself, who...
Do you recognize him?
Yes, this is Mark Alima, who goes on to play Gul Dukat.
Yes.
On Deep Space Nine as well.
Yeah. No, you couldn't just have him for this scene. He's too awesome for that.
He's too awesome.
Yeah.
So Picard says that their presence in Federation space should be viewed in an act of aggression. And the Romulans are basically like, well, if this were an aggressive act, we wouldn't be here having this conversation.
Basically, yeah. It turns out that their outposts, the Romulans' outposts, have also been attacked.
Whoa. So this is not just limited to the Federation
Yeah.
outposts, right? Something is attacking both the Romulans and the Federation.
Yeah. So Worf is like, well, yeah, but that didn't give you a right to enter Federation space. And then Tabak calls him a dog.
He's like, yeah, silence your dog.
Yeah.
That's rough.
Super rude. And then Picard is like, he's a member of my staff. And also he made a good point. But the Romulans basically say they don't need permission to enter Federation space. But they're also like, once we saw the kind of attack, we realized it was much too sophisticated for the Federation. The level of destruction was too high.
So Picard asks who's responsible, and this is where now Offenhouse's ability to read people kind of comes into play, because he's still standing at the back of the bridge, and he's like, he doesn't know. He says to Picard, he's like, he doesn't know. He's hoping that you know what's going on.
Yeah.
But he's too arrogant to ask.
Yeah.
Riker again says, like, you're not supposed to be here. Get him off the bridge. And Picard's like, yeah, but you know what? He's right.
Yeah.
The Romulans also don't know what's going on, and they were hoping that the Federation did. So Picard proposes that they cooperate with each other, since they're dealing with some other foe that's more powerful than both of them. And Sub-Commander Tabak agrees that as long as it's convenient for the Romulans, then they are going to play along with this.
And then Tabak has this like big speech, which didn't fully make sense to me.
Your presence is not wanted. Do you understand my meaning, Captain? We are back.
It's not totally clear what they were doing before, but basically he's like, we realize now we need to keep an eye on you all. So we're back.
So we're back.
Yeah.
And then they basically just close the channel and fly off.
Yeah. In their awesome ship. I love the Romulan warbirds.
They are really cool ships.
Yeah.
So now they're like, okay, security finally gets Offenhouse off the bridge.
Finally. It's
So get him out of here.
so long.
Picard looks at the view screen with like this thoughtful look. Something significant has happened.
Yes. So then in the guest quarters, Troy has found someone named Thomas Raymond, and that was Claire's son's name. She had a son, Tommy. And there's a family living just outside of Indianapolis. and she gets a picture of this Tom and Raymond. It is actually her great grandson. I think that was right. I think there were 5 greats. But it looks just like her husband. So that's kind of nice. And she's kind of worried about going to see him. But Troy's like, I mean, it's a place to start. They are family.
Picard has arranged for a ship to rendezvous with them, the USS Charleston, that will take all the 3 of them back to Earth. And of course, now they're worried because they have to figure out how to reintegrate back on 24th century Earth. And so Offenhouse is worried because he says, I have no money, I have no office. And Picard says, well, the material needs no longer exist. The challenge, because basically he's like, what's the challenge? Like,
what's the point?
And he's like, well, the challenge is to improve and enrich yourself. And this is a very simple overview of how I wish things were here.
Yeah.
It's like so much of my own time, I feel like, is set on survival.
Yes.
We had a period of time where I think everyone got to see how things could be a little bit different, where at least in Canada, when at the outset of the pandemic, our government instituted something called CERB, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit.
Yes.
And basically it was a payment that was given to people who had lost their jobs during or due to the pandemic and couldn't work. And so I got laid off from 3 jobs in 2 weeks. I was like, what am I going to do? And so this benefit was instituted. And basically a lot of people had said it could be a model for something like universal basic income. Everyone would have a guaranteed payment to ensure that you're not just like struggling to survive from like month to month to month. Having the freedom to not worry so much about survival, I had so much more time to take on other creative pursuits. One of them was this podcast.
Yes, one of them is we're working on right now.
One of them we're working on right now. So literally, like, this project would not be happening if it weren't for opportunities like that.
Yeah.
We're often so bent on this idea, we're sold on this idea that the challenge is about survival and how well we have survived or created that sense of security. But what if that was already provided?
Yeah.
And I think part of the argument is like, oh, well, then everyone would be lazy and no one would want to do anything. I don't believe that. I think people would have all kinds of things that they want to be able to do and creative pursuits that they would have. And I think that's the point Picard's making here.
I totally agree. I think Offenhouse and Picard are providing simplified but still pretty accurate representations of the sort of for and against basic and universal basic income that Offenhouse is taking the against. He's saying, well, if no one has any money, then what do people work on? And Picard is like, everything.
Yeah, everything.
They don't need to do it for money. And the other thing that I think is important to note, so people who have had to work really hard just to make enough money to survive, if they were then given the opportunity to stop doing that or to pause doing that, there would likely be a period of time when they would like not work for a while,
rest.
Because they would have to rest because capitalism is exhausting. And I think that people who argue against UBI would probably look at that and be like, see, they're not working. But if we were to take a really long look at it, and so then we're looking at people who are not exhausted by having to work so hard to survive, then I think you would find the opposite would be true. I think people would be doing so much more with their lives.
I think that in a way this circles back to our conversation at the start.
Yeah.
Find a way to make a significant contribution to the present and to their society.
Right.
And I feel like when people are making the argument that no, if it weren't for the need to survive, people wouldn't be forced to contribute to the rest of society, that argument actually comes from a feeling of disconnection from society to begin with, because they don't see how they themselves might make a contribution or how other people might, because they don't understand their connection to that wider society.
Right.
And that's the unfortunate part of how our economy is structured. We're so fragmented from one another. It always attacks that sense of community. But, well, Clemens, he knows what he's going to do.
Yeah. He's excited to release his old music because everyone forgot about it. So he's just going to do the same songs.
I wonder if there's any like apocryphal stories, like non-canon stuff about what happens to him in the future.
Yeah.
I would be interested to know.
The Adventures of L.Q. Sonny Clemens.
In the 24th century.
He wants to take Data with him, but Data's like, oh, that's intriguing, but no.
He's like, I've got a job, thanks. I don't want to be like one of your roadies.
Yeah, no, thank you. On the bridge, LaForge points out that the Charleston is going to be making an extended stop, and he's like, he's like, we could actually get them to Starbase Sierra earlier and like cut months off of their trip. And Picard says, yeah, but they'll benefit from this long trip to acclimate. Basically, he's like, yeah, but I don't want them on the ship anymore.
You just don't want them on the ship. That's exactly what's
yeah,
going
exactly.
on.
And like even Riker's like, yeah, it's kind of fun having them. It's like a visit from the past. And I feel like Picard then speaks not just for himself, but also like for the show, where he's like, our mission is to go forward and it's just begun. There's still so much to do, still so much to learn, that he's like, this has really just been our first season, but we're going places, like to the audience.
This is the season finale. It's not a terrible episode, but it certainly doesn't have the weight that other finales for Star Trek have. Well, actually, second season finale is not that great either, but that's an external force out of their control, because that's what there's a writer's strike.
Well, I guess there was one here too. I also wonder, because I don't watch a lot of TV from like this, like for the 80s, but like, what were season finales like? Were they big deals like on other shows? Do you know?
Now that you mention it, I didn't watch anything else, so maybe that was standard and it wasn't such a big deal. Yeah, now you mentioned it, I don't know.
Anyway, it is weird that the previous episode was not the season finale, because that was such a cliffhanger. And then this is like a different cliffhanger, that there's something, and I don't know, are we supposed to think that there's some connection between the conspiracy in the previous episode and then what happened in this episode? It's really not clear. And then also the Romulans are back, and that's a cliffhanger. I mean, well, there are Romulans later on, but like with the outposts, I don't think that's fully resolved.
It does in the next season.
Oh, it does? Okay. All right. Well,
yes, because this is actually a foreshadowing of the next big baddie that is going to be introduced in season 2.
And we'll talk about that.
But yeah, they do cite back or reference this episode in that episode.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of that. But it's just, it's such a funny finale. And it's almost like there are things, I don't know how, again, like I've said before, I don't know how TV works. But like if you've got this writer's strike and you have all of like this episode, you're not able to make it as good as you could have. Like they couldn't be like, you know what? We ended on a pretty good note. Why don't we just leave conspiracy as the final episode of the season? Yeah,
I think there's a number of episodes per season that are ordered, and I guess you have to fill that order. So yeah, anyway,
that's the episode.
Yeah, so thank you so much for listening to this episode, or to the season of With the First Link. That brings us to the end of season. Well, we did it.
We did
a whole season.
We finished season 1. Yeah, so we're going to take a few weeks off before coming back with season 2. This has been super fun.
It has been super fun. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Ruthie, when you first reached out to me about doing the show.
Yeah.
It's over a year ago now. And then here we are a year later. We finished the first season and we've joined the Trek Geeks Network.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting.
Super exciting. So we'll be back with season 2. Things are a little different in season 2. Don't want to spoil too much. There might be some different facial hair, different colored uniforms. It's all exciting.
It's going to be good times. So in the meantime, if you've liked what you heard, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast provider of choice.
Our cover art was created by Nathan Nunn, and you can find more of his work at nathannunn.ca. Our theme song is An Amazing Adventure by Flame Lion Studio. You can follow us on Instagram at FirstLinkPod, or you can send us an email at firstlinkpod@gmail.com. Maybe you can explain to us how the neutral zone and Federation space work, or what season finales were like in the 1980s. Any of that stuff that we clearly don't know, please feel free to inform us. I'm Ruthie.
And I'm Matthew, and if you love someone, consider the gift of cryonics.